Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to ATCSource event Finders Keepers webinar to meet Glen Cathey and have a bit of a chat with Glen Cathey around sourcing. As you know, Glen is our keynote speaker for our upcoming sourcing conference in August, and we thought it was a great opportunity to get Glen to talk to you guys today about his experiences and knowledge around sourcing. So what I'd like to just quickly do is also introduce, obviously just introduce Glen, but also introduce Joe Delicott onto the call as well. Joe's the Global Sourcing Manager for Sinclair Knights Mertz, and we thought it was great to invite Jo along today, as you know, she's got a lot of kind of Australian knowledge and local knowledge in terms of what they're doing at SKM around sourcing, so it was good for Jo to have some input. My name's Martin Warren. I know a lot of you people. I work for Inside Job, and I'm here today to really just be the, I suppose, the facilitator or the MC of the webinar. So before we kind of get into the detail of the webinar, what I just want to quickly do is just go through some logistics with you guys. Now, you probably realise that your mic is muted. The reason for that, we don't want a whole lot of questions being fired at us at the one time, but what you'll see in the bottom right hand corner, and you can see the graphic on your screen at the moment, there's a chat box. So if you have any questions, by all means just fire that question to the chat box. I've got Karen here with me who's monitoring all those questions, and what we'll try and do is address those questions during the chat with Glen and Joe, and also we'll have some Q&A at the end of it. So, but I want to apologise up front, we won't obviously get to be able to answer every question. Yes, we've got a lot of people on this webinar right now. So, as I said, we're here to talk about sourcing, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of our upcoming ATC Finders Keepers Sourcing Conference. We're very, very lucky to have people like Glen Cathey and Jim Stroud, world-renowned experts in the sourcing space, coming out to join us on the conference. Just a little bit of detail you can see on your screen. Pre-conference day on the 17th of August in Melbourne, and the pre-conference day we will have two workshops where Glen will run a sourcing workshop and Jim will run a sourcing workshop. So they're 2 half days, and there's an opportunity, if you do attend the pre-conference day, to actually attend both workshops. And the actual conference day is on the 17th of August, as I said, based in Melbourne, and you can see the website there. We can go and have a little bit more look at the detail and the schedule, and we'll share a little bit more information about the conference at the end of the day. So what I wanted to do before we kind of jump into the detail of the webinar, I just wanted to run a quick poll, and Karen's putting the poll up now. So really get everyone, if they could just quickly vote, and list their 2 top sourcing channels, based on the list below. Just interesting to see what comes out of this poll. So I'll give you about 15 or 20 seconds to do that. And I'm just looking at the numbers as they're ticking in at the moment, and have to say, what we're seeing is not surprising. Job boards is by far out in front, and followed by LinkedIn. ATS, or applicant tracking system, is quite low. So if I look at the percentages now, I'm looking at about 90% job boards, 61% LinkedIn, 35% ATS. Twitter, a very poor 2%, and Facebook 3%. So probably not unsurprising in terms of those numbers. And as you can see, there's a final view of the percentages that came out. So hopefully, as we go in through this webinar and talking with Glen, we can talk about some different ways in terms of how you can actually use some different sourcing channels to actually, find those quality candidates. So what I'd like to do in terms of the next half an hour is just really have a really good conversation with Glen and Joe. And really what I want to do is talk about sourcing. So what does sourcing mean? Glen, if you kind of, looked at what sourcing means, I'm sure if you had 5 people in a room and you asked them, 5 sources, you asked them 5 questions, or each a question around what does sourcing mean, I'm sure they'd come up with a different explanation in terms of how they determine what sourcing means to them or their organisation. Glenn, you as a world-renowned expert and practitioner in this area, how would you define sourcing? What is sourcing to you?
That's a big question, Martin. That's a very big question. I'll attempt to do it justice by saying that I believe sourcing is primarily about talent discovery and identification. The discovery piece is actually finding people. The identification, I think, is the piece by which you take a person that you have discovered and try to start figuring out whether or not they might be potentially qualified and, of course, interested and recruitable for a particular position.
Yep.
You're using online sources, and I would actually separate, as most people do, sourcing into two different categories. You're going to have your electronic, so that's anything online or database related, whether it's on or offline, and then, of course, just pure phone sourcing, although obviously one can be used to do the other.
So Glenn, I read in your recent blog that you did for the ATCSource event. You talked about the 5 levels of talent mining. I'm just really interested to for you to talk a little bit more about that, because I'm sure our listeners will be quite interested in terms of how you've defined those 5 levels and and how they can actually use those 5, I suppose, levels of talent mining to to get their desired results.
Sure. I do like to point out that, it's quite common in the industry, especially with conferences and people that write, that, there's people that are looking to just turn a phrase to be able to draw some attention. And I want to be very clear that that's definitely not the case for me. What I've tried to do is take what I actually started to learn 14, nearly 15 years ago. I didn't really know what to label it. But over the years, when I look back and I try to figure out all the different things I was doing when I was leveraging data, primarily, is that I always start with information on people electronically. When I started my career, it was with an internal candidate database of about 80,000 resumes. And this was before Google, definitely before LinkedIn, and before I even knew what job boards were or their resume databases. And what I was able to do with just that small resume database, I look back, and that's how I came up with these, I would say they're descriptors for a way of leveraging human capital data, typically in the form of a resume or a LinkedIn profile, or of course today with a Facebook profile or Twitter. But going into the first level, which is the most basic level, this is pretty much what anybody can do, which is taking keywords and titles straight from job descriptions and from what the hiring manager tells you, and you simply take those titles and keywords and plug them in a search engine or LinkedIn, and you hit search and you find people. That's level 1, and it works. No one's disputing that. Once you go beyond that, though, you have to ask, what can you do other than entering the keywords and the titles for the job? Well, you get to a conceptual search. At that point, you're stepping it up a notch, where you're taking those concepts that you're looking for in terms of a title or keywords, and then you're starting to think about all the different variants of those keywords, as well as the different titles that people may or may not use, because you have to be aware of that fact. And then you step up to level 3, which is implicit search, where you become aware that some people have skills and experience that you need that are qualified for your positions, but they don't explicitly mention it. So you have to find ways to leverage data that you have access to, whether it be job boards, as I saw from the poll, or LinkedIn or Twitter, to try to figure, how can I look for people that have implied skills? In other words, they don't actually come out and say, I have this skill, but they have a high probability of having that skill based on what you know that these individuals may or may not say about themselves. So just quickly to wrap it up, level 4 is when you start going into what some people will call semantic search. It doesn't really matter what you call it. What you're really trying to do is leverage language. Instead of just looking for a keyword like a skill or a title, you start to look for verbs as well as the nouns. Typically a skill like Java or accounts payable or SAP, or a title, they're nouns. But when you really break it down, you realize that you're not just looking for people who say things like that. You're looking for people who have had specific responsibilities, which are always verbs. So then you start to try to figure out, what kind of verbs can I put into my, or even phrases can I put into my searches, so that I can find people that talk about doing the right thing with that skill. Implementing SAP, instead of just using SAP. And then last but certainly not least, and this is one that I think very few people do, but it's very powerful, it's indirect search. It's actually leveraging any source you have access to, such as LinkedIn, and you're actually looking for the wrong people to find the right people. So for example, if I was looking for a business analyst, I could think, well, if I've already looked at all the business analysts and people who I think might be business analysts, who works with a business analyst? So then I might actually start looking for project managers and testers and things along those lines and simply call them, not to recruit them, but simply to do some phone networking and see if I can get referred to the right person.
Fantastic, Glen. That's brilliant, and I love your idea around looking for the right people by going through the people that they work for and things like that. I think that's very creative. That's brilliant. Glen, in terms of your experience, you've obviously spent a lot of time in the sourcing world and got a great track record and done some amazing things in your current organisation. Can you give some advice to our listeners around, if they're thinking about putting in place a sourcing capability within their organisation, how can they go to their manager and get the commitment of the manager? What are the sorts of, if there was two key things that they needed to be able to demonstrate, what do you think they would be?
Well, I would say one thing that would definitely be necessary to point out is something I actually wrote about just recently, which is the issues that most people, once you bring them to your attention, they admit that they're there. Job posting, which is what everybody does. And I would never say don't post a job, but the reality is when you post a job, you have no control over it comes to you. And you have to wonder exactly what is the return on investment from posting a job. You're only going to attract active candidates. You certainly can't get a passive candidate by posting a job. And most companies are enamored of the concept of, well, I want the passive person. I want the person who's not looking. And many of them are great candidates. I love recruiting passive people, but you can't get a passive person by posting a job. You actually have to go hunt them because they won't be looking for you. And it sounds logical and obvious when I mention it, but most people don't take the time to think about that and say, well, how are you going to attract a passive person? Most people don't like it when I point out that you can't attract a passive person. How would you attract them? They're going about their job wherever they're doing a really good job already. They're not thinking about making a change. Maybe they'd be open to it, but they certainly won't be looking at a job posting online, or even if you somehow socially push a job in front of their Facebook page, most people that aren't really looking don't really perceive a job. And so the value to an organization, I believe, to point out how valuable it is just point out that, on average, and it depends, I'm sure the statistics are different country by country, but you have to admit the minority of all people are actively looking. In the United States, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the generally accepted data point is that about 14% of people are actively looking at any one point in time, and about 22% are passively looking, and about 24% are not looking. So if you do the math there, about 66% of people are either passive or not looking, and that's the majority of the talent pool. And those are also what hiring managers and executives typically want you to go find. I want you to find that gem of a person who's doing a fantastic job at a competitor. Well, they simply cannot be acquired through a job posting. So sourcing is the only way to be able to go out and hunt those people who aren't looking for you. You have to go look for them, and then that's how you engage them to recruit them.
Totally. Look, I agree with you, Glen, and I think the numbers that you just shared there, I think they're quite similar in Australia. Obviously, a smaller market, but yeah, I think those numbers are quite similar. And there was recently, I'm not sure if the people on this webinar saw the recent white paper that LinkedIn put out around the split of passive versus semi-passive and non-passive. Shared similar sorts of numbers, which was really interesting information.